Hey guys, Darren here. Welcome to Mayhem Country Living. I have been out of town for a quick trip doing some stuff for work, and now I'm heading back, coming up from the Panhandle, Florida, Alabama Panhandle, and I always go the back ways. I always like these little two-lane roads. Most of the time, the speed limit is 55, and you can see you can cruise along pretty easy, pretty steady at about 70-75 miles an hour. This one, Highway 5, ultimately contours all the way down indirectly and roundabout from central Alabama all the way down into Mobile, so you can cruise and do a good scenic trip going down these back roads like this. More to come, guys. How about this? 4 hours, something like that at this driving. But riding on these back roads and going through these little bitty towns that you don't even know the names of and hardly even appear on these maps. It reminds me of where I grew up. I grew up in Childersburg, Alabama. Some of you might have heard me mention it before, but there's not much out there in Childersburg, Alabama, except for paper mill and DeSoto Caverns. And that's really about it. Not a whole lot out there. We grew up out there, and it was one of the best places probably for a kid to grow up. I lived with my grandparents, my mom's parents for the longest. My mom and I did while she was going to college. She went to college to be a teacher, graduated high school, and went to school. And then I came along. I guess I was an oops. But we lived with my grandparents, and so my grandparents were pretty instrumental in raising me. And at the end of this video, you know, I'll ask you a question just to kind of tie everything in, because it's just kind of what led me to go down this path today on today's video. And I was under my grandfather's wings from the time I could walk, and so I was his shadow, and I went and did everything he did. Granddaddy was an old moonshiner that had converted to Jesus, and he always said, before I met your grandmother, all I ever did was make and sell shine. And he said, and I found her and I quit doing that. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. And incidentally, they used to make it in DeSoto Caverns. That was one of the places that they used to make the moonshine. So it's kind of an interesting side note. I always say I come from a long line of moonshiners and bootleggers and preachers, and that's all the case. But he was an old pulp wooder, and worked for one of the paper mills for a while, and had a heart attack, and so after he got out of the hospital, they fired him. So he started working on cars, and that was what he did to support the family, because I think he was canned probably in his 50s, and nobody would hire him back because of his heart. So hell, he just started working on cars for people and made a very good living doing that, and took care of everybody. And so I learned how to do all the different stuff with him, and worked under him and helped him and handed him tools and sockets, and I'm sure the wrong one many, many, many times. But that's kind of where I got the feel for working with my hands, I guess. Alright guys, now we're back. Miles and miles of road. There we go. Granddaddy was always, he was not very tall, but he was just really, really broad man. Huge arms and muscles from all the years of doing the pulp wooding and all the physical stuff and working on on his parents' farm and their homestead. So I mean, it lent to just huge upper body and legs and everything. And he was a very stout fella, and I was always amazed by his hands were just so much bigger. Even when I was a kid, I mean, he just had these big, huge mitts. But that's one of the things that always impressed me. There wasn't anything cocky about him, but there was always an air of confidence that if it was broke, he could fix it, or if there was a problem, we'd get through it and figure it out. So that was always, you know, there in the back, and those seeds in me planted of what a man's supposed to do, how he's supposed to act, how he's supposed to behave. So that was probably one of the best ways, I guess, for a kid to grow up. More to come. Granddaddy used to chew tobacco, and he chewed the hard tobacco and the soft tobacco. So he would chew Cannonball, Mule Train, Beech Nut, and Levi Garrett, some of the others. And he would sit on the back porch, push back in the rocking chair so it was up on its back rails, and he would sit there and we'd chew and talk, and sometimes we'd shell beans or corn, and he'd sit there and talk. And I remember one time he said, I said to him, I said, "What is that you're chewing, Granddaddy?" And he'd say, "Oh, this is chewing tobacco." And I said, "Can I have some?" He said, "Sure." And he opened up the pouch and held it down to me, and I got out a couple of leaves, and he said, no, you got to get a big handful of this stuff. And I grabbed it. He said, "Just put it in your mouth, put it in your cheeks, and start chewing." And I did, and stuck it in there, and you know how it's got that smoky, sweet taste at first. And I began to chew, and Granddaddy dropped that rocking chair back down and leaned over the rail and spit. Then I leaned over the rail to spit, and he says, "Old men spit, young men swallow the stuff." And I said, "Oh." And so, boom, I swallowed, and I chewed, and I swallowed, and I chewed, and I swallowed. And after about maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I leaned over that porch rail and threw up everything that I had eaten that day, probably the day before. And I looked up at him, and he says, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you like some more?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "Well, all right then." And to this day, 45 years later, I have not chewed a stem of tobacco. I have to say, that is one of the nasty habits that he cured me of. I wish that he had cured me of several others. But that one right there, you don't have to worry about me chewing tobacco. More coming. Now, as the years would go by, Mom got married, and then she and I went to live with her husband, obviously, my stepfather, my dad. But we only lived a couple of miles down the road, so I would ride my bike in the afternoons or on the weekends. And a lot of times I would just walk up the old railroad tracks behind the house and get to their place from ours just that way. And I might have been 10 or 11. And it was probably 4 miles if you went up the road, or maybe a mile or a mile and a half if you walked up the railroad tracks. And so we always just go up the railroad tracks, or I'd ride my bicycle with no helmet, because back then kids bounced a lot better, I guess. And we would go up there, and I'd still hang out and do stuff with both my grandparents, both sets of grandparents. They only lived like a mile from each other, both my grandparents, sets of them. And it was just that small of a town. And then the years went by a little bit further, and everybody started growing up and getting a little age to them. Health problems started coming on. I moved away, moved to Birmingham, the big city that everybody talked about. Not much to it. I try not to even go into that place anymore. But time goes and it rolls along. It's amazing how fast it runs now. I'll look up and a week's gone, and if I take a minute, then a month is gone. It's absolutely amazing how fast time goes the older you get. But we would go back and visit, and the visits, maybe once a month, but we were still very close. And he started having a lot of problems with his memory, and then remembering things and getting lost and driving. And he'd come up and he had ended up having some problems, and of course it was dementia, and so that really was tough on him and me and all of us, because you try to tell a man that has 6 cars that he can't drive a car anymore, but he still works on them, but he can't drive them. That was something. And finally, I guess he just accepted it. And it was amazing to watch the changes go on. Went from being a strong, independent man to just a little kid like himself. It was just utterly shocking. And here I was growing and learning and getting stronger and everything, and he was actually going the opposite way. And it was very sobering period for me. And that was really a tough time, because it's kind of hard to watch Superman die. Alright, now we are driving through the great town of Marion, Alabama, home of the Marion Military Institute. Where was I? Yeah, the dementia and the Alzheimer's. It ended up that my grandmother couldn't take care of him anymore. He had to go into a nursing home, and we all knew kind of what that meant. And I would go visit him when I would come back on weekends, and then he would kind of forget who I was and who everybody was. And we would sit there and talk or watch reruns on television and just not say much of anything, just two strangers that kind of know each other. And then there wasn't even that, and he would just kind of sit there. And so, well, we would sit there, and they would always say that, sometimes he'll have lucid moments, and he can, he'll talk and remember everything just fine, and then it just goes away. And there was one time I was sitting there with him, I think it was one evening, and we were sitting there, hell, we might have been watching a Gunsmoke rerun or something like that. And I was in my 20s by that point. And he had one of those lucid moments, and he kind of remembered everything, and we sat and talked for a good long time. And then he said, "I know what's happening to me." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I sure hate this." I said, "Yeah, Granddaddy, me too." And he said, "I really wish that you would just get my shotgun and just put it to my head and pull that trigger." looked at him and I said, God, Granddaddy, I can't do that. And I knew what he was talking about. At the house in the corner by the nightstand was where he always kept his shotgun. Big old long black Oxford Arms double barrel 12 gauge. And he said, I really wish you would, boy. He always called me boy or baby boy. And I said, I just can't do it, Granddaddy. Can't do it. And he says, well, I understand. And then we kind of went back to watching TV, and he faded out again. After that, the nurse came and got me and said that visiting hours were over. And so I left. And I'm going to say I believe that was the last time I ever saw him alive. Because shortly after that, they had decided to move him to hospice care, to come home to die. And then I think that was a day or two later, and then just shortly after that, he did finally die. So that was a really tough time. It was really tough. And we had the funeral. And it was a big funeral. The town came out, the fire department, the rescue squad, because he worked with all those guys for years, all the police, the county workers and everything. Everybody came out. And it was just a really nice funeral. As nice as a funeral could be, I guess. But it was just amazing. I went into to the viewing. You know, the family gets there early and we're setting everything up. And it was like I didn't recognize him because he had just wasted away. And it looked like he was half the man he was. And I thought, wow, that's just terrible. I wonder where everything went. And here's the kicker. I like to think that maybe, just maybe, some of it went into me. Alright guys, now we're back, and there it is. There's that story. There's that question. What do you do when Superman's dying? What do you do when he asks you to help him? That was tough. That was really tough. I gotta say, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about them. Really. Some people are just critical in what makes you you, and they were more kind of guys. So thanks for coming with me on the Friday drive or the Friday ride. Hell, this might even become a thing that we do, because it sure breaks up a 4-hour drive, I gotta tell you that. Makes it a little bit easier. I love looking at these old houses going by too. But I'm gonna wrap it up here. In just a second, you're gonna see a picture of my ugly mug pop up over here. On the opposite side are gonna be some videos, if you're indeed your brand of wacky. And leave some comments below. What are your thoughts? That was a tough decision. You can apply that to dang near anything. Life, prepping, whatever you want to. Thanks for listening.